I'm Rodman Premack, and I'm the Global Ambassador of Design Miami. And I have the pleasure of always attending these talks. There's something very special that we do at the fair, bringing voices from the design world, bringing voices from academia and the press. This afternoon, it's our last talk, talking about craft, which is one of my favorite topics. And we're very, very pleased that our good friend Caroline Roux is here to moderate a conversation with four great designers. And I'll hand it over to Caroline. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoy the last of our talks. It's been a good week so far.
Thank you, Rodman, and thank you for coming. I know it's a really, really nice sunny day. It's the first nice sunny day that we've had, so I think you all deserve a beer after this. I'm really delighted to have these amazing people with me. Michael Young, English-born designer who's been in Hong Kong for quite a long time. He's about to move to New Zealand. Shahar Livne, who comes from Tel Aviv, I just assume it's in Israel, and has been a student at Eindhoven and is now stayed on in Eindhoven, where she carries out extraordinary research into materials. And Ivano and Kyre from Pretziada, who I haven't quite familiarized myself with their surnames enough to use them, so I do apologize for that, who are based in Sardinia, where they work with very long-standing local craft and bring it into sort of future and contemporary and future relevance offered in the sort of luxury market. They're each going to give a little presentation about their work, just sort of 5 minutes. So if you're not entirely familiar with what they do, you'll have a good idea of where we're all coming from. And then we're going to have a little chat between ourselves. So we're starting with Michael. Do you want a microphone? Is he recording it?
Can you hear me? Yeah, you do. Okay. Hello? Okay. Yeah, so anyway, thanks. Yeah, I'm blown away by being invited to do this because it's my first time in Miami.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'll just chill out then, all right? So look, I'm actually, I'm a good friend of Caroline's. We've known each other before the internet was invented. That's just sorry to say that. Yeah, honestly, we're gems. So look, I'm actually an industrial designer, and my studio, basically, we design industrial products. A lot of the things I'm going to show you here are the result of things that I can't produce within industry, but use the factories that do me favors or processes. So for example, if you look at this thing, this is mental, okay? This is a 3-inch, I used to work for Tom Dixon, I have to confess that in front of you, 32 years ago. So I know a lot about bending metal. So I welded this huge metal tool and injected it with aluminium to 600 degrees, and made an explosion inside the metal tool to make these kind of like metal muffins, okay? Now, normally these guys are making stuff for aircrafts, and that's one thing. So that was me just going around China, flying to the middle of, that's a 5-hour taxi drive from the nearest airport, okay? It's fucking tough working in that, doing that stuff. And then it sort of turns into, I like standing up when I talk, is that okay? Yeah, you don't mind? And then it turns into this sort of object here, and then this one here, which is like kind of, I think it's really, like you can see the yellow tone on this chair is anodized. Now, anodizing is normally used on telephones for Apple. Now, I got a whole factory. This chair weighs 70 kilos to stop the telephone production and dip this chair into an anodizing tank. So it was really bringing craft and industry together in a very peculiar way. And then later I did these vases for Gallery All, who I've got an exhibition with upstairs, which is based on Taoism. And because I work in Hong Kong, I can't say I'm the most spiritual person in the world. I'm broken on several levels. But this was my contribution to spirituality and Taoism. So this collection is sold in Beijing. You can see in the lower corner, again, you know, these sort of this process is used for making cooling vents for washing machines. So I found a factory in Guangzhou and then started a company up to manufacture these lights. And that's all just simple, like, kind of extrusions. And I did a whole collection of products based on that process. And I think, yeah, oops. It keeps on going, and you can see on the bottom one, these are the actual extrusions. You can see them, they're like 2 meters high, unliftable, but I did a show at a museum in Belgium, and this was a kind of nice way to show them, and then I did a few glass versions. Again, here's a bit of a weird thing. This is being chopped off at the front, but I actually made this piece of aluminium in Australia. It's 100% pure aluminium. It was a big block, and then sent it to China and had it CNC'd three-dimensionally, and made one chair for an exhibition in Los Angeles. In San Francisco. So that's me just using high technology in production towards craft, and you know, I don't care whether I sell these things, but I did sell this table, which is made of folded paper out of $1 US, 10 US dollar notes, and sold it to a client in Switzerland, believe it or not, and don't ask me why or the name of the client, but so that table's actually made of cash. And then I do all of these other things. That's got one of those. You can get those in cash. So that is folded. That's made of newspaper. It's called the Chinese Times. It's made out of the same as the Sunday Times newspaper, but the Chinese version. And then lots of different lights. So we do. I've got my 5 minutes. Is probably coming up pretty soon, really. So I might shut up. We do. That's a brain, but it's made in China. We do a lot of cloisonne. This is what I'm showing here, which is all three-dimensionally made cloisonne work. And this has taken like 7 years to sort of get into production, and it's nearly ready. And that's upstairs if you pass by the gallery all thing. Carbon fiber. People think carbon fiber is about manufacturing, but it's actually about craft. It's like the new Carl Hansen. Yeah.
That's us.
No, that's me. That's my project. No, that's my project. Anyway, I'll hand you over.
Right. Thank you, Michael. That was fantastic. Great. So this is your work, yeah? Who wants to start? Ivano. Oh, you've got your microphones. Okay. There you go. You can have the clicker. You were going to talk about that.
Is this working? Yeah. I guess I feel like there's more people on the stage in front of us. But anyway, so yeah, exactly. So me and Kyre, we moved to Sardinia 5 years ago, in the really south of the island, and we originally we started to work as a storyteller online. We were telling our point of view about the island, and then right after we started to create our collection by working directly with artisans, local artisans, and also bringing in Sardinia physically designers or creative minds in general than we like. We call them, we say, we don't have any money, but we would like to have you on the island, and nothing. Apparently some people decided to come, and that's how we started. And trying to help me with this, what actually we do in Sardinia. And when actually I was trying to do some selection with the images, when I saw the craft, do you know anything about graft? To graft a tree. It's transforming a tree from being wild to being productive. So like we have olive trees which actually are wild and they're not productive. So you need to cut them and injecting them like, branches from the regular tree. That's what we do. We're trying to keep the roots Sardinian by inserting all these branches who actually are bringing the contaminations, bringing the world into something completely consolidated, which is the roots of our objects. And that's why the picture about the grafted trees. What else? My God, the concept of the grafting, like,
it took everything out of you.
Crazy. It was so hard.
No, I think the important thing to say about our project is we moved there 5 years ago. We started 3 years ago doing Pretziada, and we really had a very basic idea that we were going to start working with artisans, with traditional craft, and both curating more traditional crafts and inviting creatives to come and do new objects out of these crafts. But what we found there was a definite state of paralysis and quite a crisis. And it was a bit of an identity crisis, a bit of an economic crisis, and also a bit of a creativity crisis. A lot of different crises.
Well, it sounds very interesting because Sardinia can be, has the two extreme in a very small piece of land. You have the extremely rich area, which is the north, and all the rest of the island is completely in an abandoned state. And of course, people is missing hope in this, and especially art crafts, like craftsmanship in Sardinia, is in a very delicate state at the moment. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to contaminating and bring in positivity, but also give them the tools to maybe believe that tradition sometimes can be a sort of a limit.
That it can be a limit, and that it can also be a building point for bridges to the rest of the world.
Yeah, what we're trying to say to them is like that tradition is such a great thing. It's such a present to have it. But it's something to start to be something else.
Also, I think when
this
ever
is
since
happening
we've
very
been
often, by the way, even in the
we'll be correcting
bedroom.
each other for the rest of the night. No, but I think that just the word tradition makes me roll my eyes by now, because I think that there's been such confusion as to what does that word actually mean. The only definition that holds true to me now is that in creating our traditions and in celebrating our traditions, we need to have a clear idea of what we want to be, because whatever we're doing today is going to become the tradition for tomorrow. So we do feel a lot of times working on an island in traditional craft that people feel that they've been blocked by this cage of what they're allowed to do, what they're supposed to do. And then they have the other side that's blocking them in, which is a very servile attitude towards what will sell and what is interested. So one of the things that we work with artisans is recognizing that that they don't need to relegate themselves to creating souvenirs, because the souvenir asks you to constantly make something smaller and more affordable and easier. And when you're talking about skills and stories that have an extraordinarily long history, you also need to make sure that you give that importance to it and that you allow it to have that importance, even if it makes it more difficult for you, for the world, for everybody to appreciate what's being created.
5 minutes are gone, for sure.
We need to find Shahar's slides now. Very nice images there. I'm enjoying it very much.
Here we go.
There she is. Oh, you need one of those. Yeah. We've got a little mountain.
We'll just pass them on. Maybe to something a little bit different. I work more in the speculative realm. This is kind of an ongoing research. It started as my graduation project at Design Academy Eindhoven about 2 years ago. So I'm a conceptual material designer. I call myself like that because I'm not using materials to tell stories. And I really believe that every material has a past, present, and future. So it really bears the remains of its narrative within it. So what I actually did, I'm looking into the future of plastic pollution and how it will transform into a part of our geological record. I don't even know I'll get there. So the material you see, I made it, and it's called lithoplast. It comes from the word lithos, which means rock, and plast, which means malleable or can be molded in ancient Greek. That's also why we call plastic plastics. And I was really questioning the different relations we have with plastics, because when in the future, when the only plastic we'll be able to find, like the traditional plastic of now, will be probably nature, it will be in a new way, it will be in a new form, it will become kind of a hybridized with nature, and that's also something that we already see. I don't know if I have a picture of it. Here. So, what did I do? No, it's okay. So what you see here, like this rock, it's already a naturally occurring type of rock. It's the newest type of rock on the face of the earth, and it's a plastic rock. It's called the plastiglomerate. And when I tell people about it, they either say amazing, or they either, yeah, exactly. So they're either really scared as well. And I wanted to kind of break this feeling we have with plastic, because now in our time it's really became the source of all evil. It's like the cause of extinction. It's the cause of pollution, of climate change. Everybody's became against it. But I wanted to see it in a different way. I wanted to look in a bigger scale than the human scale, but really look at the natural scale, which is separate from the notions of good and bad. Oh, now I need to go back. Oh my God. I have no idea what I did. Yeah. So when I started the research, I really noticed that there's a lot of kind of do-it-yourself attitude also towards plastic. People started to really use it as a raw material for craftsmanship. So it kind of gave some kind of also liberation for people who don't know anything about woodworking or metal or those kind of like things that you have to master for tenth of years, like to become a master of working with them or work closely to a craftsman. But you have plastic at home, so you can just melt it. Luckily, YouTube gave us also this open source for a lot of knowledge. You can find a lot of people and projects. There's this beautiful Dutch project called Precious Plastic, which is really emancipating the idea of recycling plastic at home into useful objects. But you can, even before that project started, you could really see already people like taking plastic and turn it into a raw material again and starting to find their own relationship with it. So it became it came out of the factory and it became an intimate material that you can work with at home on a lathe, just like people are using wood. So for me, it was really interesting, and I wanted to look further into the future. This is a picture from a scientific research about the burial of plastics in the Earth's strata, and I thought, okay, what will happen in thousands of years? So not only the way we look at plastic now, so how it will transform. As again, so they're already this process starting. The other picture you see on the left, right? On the right? On the left, the black one. So this is a close-up of my own material, of lithoplast. And what I do, I kind of geomimic a natural process which calls metamorphism. So it's the process that turns fossils into marble, for example, or it's heat and pressure which are happening because of burial. And a really nice anecdote is that yesterday I met a geologist here in the exhibition, and it was so great because he was really excited about this project, and I felt like I got another sign of approval from a real expert. And he said, for me, this is really new perspective, because for me as a geologist, timescales are not as other people see timescales. For me as a geologist, I look in millions of years, thousands of years, and he was really excited about it. I just wanted to say, and it made me very happy. So I started working at almost like a craft person. I found its potential when I reheated sometimes you see it also on those YouTube that people, they put some plastic together, they melt it in the oven, and then they have this marbly material. But I wanted to be very honest to what happens in nature. So I worked with certain sediments, which will probably be at the same environment of plastic pollution, if it's at the depth of the sea, or just at the beach, or maybe in a landfill. And the interesting thing is that the moment the plastic is mixed with those natural material, it gives a little bit more time to mold it. So when you work with molten plastic, it's cooling down really fast, like a few seconds, and then you can't use it. But the moment it hybridizes with natural materials, it gives you more time to work with it. And I could really mold it as if it was really thick clay. And I thought, wow, that's really a great potential to look at the craftsmanship materials of the future. If we're losing materials now because of extinction, because of pollution, because of plastic, we lose certain type of animals and plants which are being used for raw materials for craftsmanship for thousands of years. What will be the next materials, and what will be their value for us? This is a little movie. How do I turn it on? Oh, is it? Yeah, it's a little video of me working with the material. So it's a bit hot. It's around 100 degrees, so it's a bit different than clay. But as you can see, it's very thick, and it smells quite horribly. But so this is how I usually work with it. So I really need it. So it's, again, this human touch that is very not familiar with plastic as we know it, because it's used in factories. It's made in factories. Then I really applied my knowledge with ceramics. I did my internship with a porcelain master in the Netherlands. And I wanted to see how it can become traditional again, how it can relate to the past materials we used to use, like that were really intimate to us, like clay. And then what was interesting about it, that because it's a mixture of a lot of types of plastic, so I don't really separate them, because in nature they are not separated. And because of the sediments, it becomes extremely hard, so I really need to polish it as if it was stone. So it's a very, very laborious work, which sometimes makes me really tired. But I'm also very happy with it, because I feel like I'm really connecting with the material in a personal level. So those are two objects I made. The new objects I made for Design Miami are showing here in the entrance hall. Oh. So I always, when I make an object as a designer, I really look into philosophy. I really look into a reasoning, how it can communicate also the knowledge of my research. What you see here is two different chapters. I call it chapters. And each one is really looking at this transformation of plastic from this slick and clean material into a new craft material and new human-touched material. And I think my 5 minutes are probably up. So if you're interested, I will tell more afterwards.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's fascinating to have these different designers up on the stage together, because in some senses it's hard to see how they are kind of unified into one trajectory. But on the other hand, I think what is interesting is that they're all looking at the world through a sort of very sociological and anthropological way. And yet they're coming from very different temporal points. And actually, Shahar pointed out earlier when we were talking that we sort of have the past, the present, and the future. And if, in a sense, I think you're very much located, you have a great sense of place, which is a very specific location in Sardinia. And even we do have a specific location in Hong Kong, because it's a place where there's still workshops where you can access, funny little techniques that people do. Your sort of sense of place is in the future, really, isn't it? I mean, when we're talking about design now, and when we are in this critical situation where we know that we're damaging the environment and we shouldn't be making any more things, really, and you're trying to readjust the material situation. I just wondered, it's an obvious question, but how do you think your work circumvents the problem that we've got too many things?
No, I think that's a fantastic question. It's something we all grapple with whenever we're at a fair, no? Because of the sheer quantity of, but also just the sheer quantity of beautiful things that we're surrounded by. To be completely honest, I think that we have more questions than we have answers. In the sense that for us, every object that we make and that we present has a deep history and story to it. So when you're presenting a carved chair, you're actually presenting the history of seating on an entire island and in the Mediterranean. And for us, that object has a story of its own and is bringing forth history, which can be from millennia in the past all the way through to today, becomes to us the moving force behind every.
The story behind the object is definitely the protagonist for us, and it's also the reason to motivate us to keep going on this direction.
Yeah, and also quickly, I think, like we said, Sardinia is one of the poorest regions in Italy, which means it's definitely one of the poorest regions in Europe. And what we see there is constant desperation. And only a generation ago, people there were living a completely different lifestyle, a lifestyle that today we completely romanticize. But they were barefoot, they had no running water, they were cold during the winter. And they weren't educated, they didn't have options. So another driving force for us is also the idea of...
I want to give a little sample, I'm sorry. So my father, I'm so sorry. No, this is really important because otherwise they will never understand. So my parents and Kyre's parents are from the same generation, Californian, Sardinian. My father, at the age of 7, 8, he was forced to leave school to go work with cows. The same time, the same year, Kyre's grandparents, so Kyre's mother was already in the car, and in her father's car with the AC. Just to give you a little example.
Well,
AC, air conditioning.
My
father was barefoot, and Kyre's mother was AC in the car. Same time.
Well,
just to give you an idea.
Right, and I guess what I think is interesting about that is to see the generation of your father now having bridged what we have now. So we often are working with artisans who grew up actually forced into the workshop as children, and when you talk to them about where you're trying to take their work, oftentimes it can be almost offensive to them or frustrating to them in a way, because what you're trying to bring them back to is a past that was painful, which is something that needs to be recognized. But I do think that the driving force behind what we do is also knowing that there is an island which has this incredible cultural heritage, which comes from all of the Mediterranean, because it's been heavily influenced by North Africa, by the Middle East, by Spain, and you're telling people that exists.
I mean, Michael, how do you join in this discussion? You're in Asia, which is the epicenter of mass consumption, and has filled the world with a lot of less good goods. That is changing enormously now, and I think the production levels in Asia, are quite refined. It's changed a lot since you first went there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting being in the context with you guys, because I'm not an artist, okay? I made that decision 30 years ago that I'm an industrial designer. I had a choice. I could have gone to art school or I could have gone to design school. And I made the choice to be an industrial designer. So for me, when you're talking about the things that you're talking about, so for, I'm making a chair at the moment. The minimum order quantity to sell that chair is 50,000 units a year. That's one company in Sweden. And there's another company in India who I'm designing for. Now, the interesting thing that sort of joins us together is, say, for example, the UK government saying we're going to put 30% tax, or we're going to put tax on anything that doesn't have 30% of recycled material inside it. So I'm forced, as a creative person, to find solutions all over the world for these people, for these factories, and it sort of resonates with me what you're doing, because, you know, I'd love to be able to do this, but I've got too many employees to pay for, and I can't do that research. I've got an economy to keep fighting for within a certain level of industry. But I do my sidekicks, so that is that sort of stuff that I showed at the beginning, which is the sort of the sort of stuff that bubbles to the surface of my creative desires. So I guess, you know, I'm forced, unfortunately, to be more of an economist, despite the fact most of my friends would say, Michael, you're definitely not. You know, because I am a dreamer, but those things take me quite a long way, quite frankly. So I have accountability on different levels of creativity, and that drives me forward. And I'm also can be a bit of a space cadet. So what was the question?
We started off by talking about the idea that we were all very concerned about overproduction and overconsumption and
yes,
the
exactly.
proliferation of things, and yet we're all in this business of protecting things, except Shahar, who's actually trying to do it in an extremely responsible way.
But it's impossible, because, you know, there are brands that I aspire to, and I've watched, like what is it, New Birds sneakers, you know, Away luggage, and they've undercut 50% of the market, and they've gone up to billions instantly, and they're really responsible companies, and they're really successful business models. So for me, they're all creative people answering questions that need to be answered for consumption. And the fact is that I'm not ashamed to be making this many chairs if I do it responsibly or I do it correctly, because I can give an input. And, you know, listening to you is inspiring, because, you know, I can't do that. I'd love to be able to do that, but I know that I'm accountable to put that into my kind of studio program. So, you know, I'm kind of was saying before.
Yeah. It's interesting. You bring down some economics, and when we were talking before, Shahar was explaining that the vases that she has out in Design at Large are for sale, that she has to sell them for quite a high price, because they actually fund
only 3 in
all
existence.
the research.
Only 3 of existence as well.
And so you're sort of put in this funny corner when you're participating in a market you're not really part of, in a sense, are you?
That's true. The thing is also, like, if I react on what you say, I think I'm the youngest in the group, and I do have this kind of luxury as well, like to be a beginner designer, and especially like to really be able to still, you know, I don't have children, I'm not married, and luckily I have parents who can still support me just right after school. So I do have this luxury to do a research like this, and sell those vases for a really lot of money and make only 3 of them. But I'm sure that at some point, okay, I do also other projects which are also conceptual, but maybe are more relevant to the present economy. And we all, of course, need to feed ourselves and pay rent. So this is at some point also became, from a speculative perspective, it became actual objects that I do want to sell, and I do want to show in exhibitions, and I do want to sell to collectors. And the ultimate idea is also maybe not to produce it in a more than 1 or 3, but really like to also talk to inspire companies, and to understand that when we make materials, we need to make them differently. And if I go a little bit into the plastic, the idea of plastic as a multi-situated material, what we call a hyper object. I don't know if I have really time to explain hyperobject, but it's materials that they exist everywhere. And now there's now Asia. They closed their gates to all of Europe's trash. So actually, Europe is getting back all their plastic, and this movement of plastic also, it's very related to present economy, but I think also how nature is moving plastic will be part of the future geo-anthropological landscape. So, for example, when I worked on this project, my mentor, my teacher back then, he said, what will happen if China in thousands of years will be the new Carrera, because you'll mine this material there. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really changing. Yeah, that's a new perspective about economies as well and political situations.
Yes, I mean, the idea of a plastic mine in China is kind of pretty amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's like, it was interesting, you used the word speculative, and you call yourself a speculative designer. In a really funny way, although you're delving into history and an existing indigenous culture and practice, your work is speculative in a way too, isn't it? Because presumably it's about shifting it through time. You're having to move it forwards. You have to be. You really need to be future thinking in order to justify your operation as well.
Otherwise, people will never understand. You need to speak the contemporary language, otherwise you're missing the point. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I think before I was talking with Shahar about the fact that a lot of times we hear people talk about craft, and the first thing that comes to mind is panic. Like, so many techniques are disappearing every minute, and you feel the clock ticking, and every second that passes is a new technique that's lost. But at times we need to ask ourselves, isn't that okay when something that's not relevant to today is going to pass, and we will develop something else that makes more sense for today. So one of the things that's extraordinarily important to us is to have that relevance always in whatever we're proposing.
Yeah, we spoke about it, that the thing is that the Earth works in a metabolistic way. So it's like an endless cycle. So, okay, a lot of people say to me, like, you work with plastic, and they think I look at it only in a positive way, but I try to make a very neutral stand here, because I really want to look at it in the bigger picture. And they say, yeah, but it's killing animals and it's suffocating nature. And I said, in a geological timescale, the world doesn't give a fuck about us. Excuse my French, but it's true. And yeah, the Anthropocene, like, we're going to be like this thin layer in geology. Like, if we think about it, if we compare ourselves to the time that Earth exists, we're like a split second. And there were mass extinctions before, so we're the catalyst of this mass extinction. Okay, that's okay, but it already happened, and it gave place for new things. So we're giving place for a new nature. I just read a while ago that in the garbage patch that we're trying to clean, there's new ecologies starting to happen. And there's like those fungus and certain animals that they kind of evolve to digest PET. And that's extremely interesting. That's more like, is it bad, is it good? I'm not sure. Maybe for us, in a very small scale, it is. But if we look at nature, just the way it rolls.
I mean, it's funny. Well, you're talking about future and things. And Michael's about to move to New Zealand. And is that going to affect your work? Do you think that when you extract yourself from Hong Kong, which is this sort of fiercely urbanistic, human-centric condition, do you think that moving away from it might begin to radically affect the way that you think?
I'm quite experienced at living in remote places. I mean, I've lived in Reykjavik for a few years, and I'm kind of used to that isolation level. But I guess, I'm not going to try and manufacture anything in New Zealand. I'm just going to stare at the sea and then send information to China. But I'm trying to kind of get my head around how to engage in this sort of, because this conversation's gone much more about recycling and, ultimately though, I think as a creative person, I'm a survivor ultimately. So I was born in England, and when I started design, I was involved. There's probably about 10 designers, so you get involved in craft and making things. You make one thing and you try and sell it. And it's pretty much what I'm doing upstairs, you know. I mean, I'm using artisans from China, who are these beautiful old men. They're all 60 years old and they're hammering away at metal. And it's really where I started, and my roots were in Sunderland in the north of England, which is a working town. So nothing's really changed. So I'm sure when I go to New Zealand, something will happen, but I guess the world has just changed. I mean, New Zealand's become this kind of weird place where there's all of these gazillion billion companies doing this kind of like weird recycling shit. Fucking Elon Musk's got a place down the road, you know. It's just like become this kind of weird cosmos of, you know, it's so far away, but it's so relevant. And I don't know.
It's also where all the sort of tech billionaires have got their disaster houses where they're all going to escape.
Yes, we're actually all we're waiting. We're all going there. We're waiting for the end of the world. I've been a pessimist all my life, so I think it's a good. I'm just future thinking.
I just want to add. Well, the world is definitely changing, and with the world we are changing too. So maybe you're looking for something else. Maybe we're looking for something different. And the fact that you started to work in the design field 34, 35 years ago, of course, has a different perspective for what we have. We see different issues in terms of production now compared to 35 years ago. And
did you both train as designers, or
no.
You seem more like anthropologists than designers?
No.
Really. I'll explain that after.
No, I got the right word eventually. I'm not that stupid. I know from the north.
So what's your background?
This is my first job actually in my life. So I started to work at the age of 37. Before that, I used to do vandalism. Sorry for that, but yeah, graffiti trains, and then I tried to work in contemporary art, and I did quite well. But just take a walk on Art Basel, and I felt sick immediately about that world, and I decided to do something else. And I think in crafts, anthropology, territory, and environment, I find, and the passion with the, I love making stone walls in the property where we live, and olive trees. I'm finding the balance for myself, you know, and of course Kyre and the family. Why I'm talking about this?
Because I asked if you trained as a designer.
A glass of wine.
And what about you, Kyre?
No, well, we both worked in the world of aesthetics, if that exists. But no, neither of us had any contact with the world of design before 3 years ago. I worked as a set designer, building sets. And yeah, Ivano was a vandal.
And you presume you went to Eindhoven, which is a very particular choice of school because it's invested in strategy and it's invested in, you know, sort of deep thinking and design as a way to systematize tools and rather than necessarily making objects. But
Yeah,
did you find what you wanted when you, or have you really invented your own path?
I think what Design Academy is doing, my mom used to say to me, like, I kept saying to her in the first, second year, like, I don't feel like I'm learning anything, because if I talk to people who do exchange from the classical industrial design schools in Israel, for example, and they get all those courses in 3D and those things, I said to my mom, I don't really learn anything. And she said, you're cooking. It's cooking you. At the end, you'll open the pot, it will be ready. And she's right, because I think what Design Academy is really doing is, of course, if you're in the right department for yourself and if you have the right mentors, you need to find yourself there. I think if you're a very reflective person, you'll find yourself. And I was also very lucky. I'm one of those few lucky people who already, when they graduated, they already found themselves. Because I have also a lot of friends which they still don't know what they want to do.
So then you did go through a process of self-determination, really. I mean, you...
Yeah, I was very reflective, and luckily I also had, in my internship, I worked with this amazing couple, Erna and Franz, and they're traditional craftsmen. She's a jewelry maker, he's a porcelain maker. and they really inspired me, like, to really follow my heart. And I think that was really the turning point before I started graduating. And I was really reflecting every time I start a project, I work with a material and what is really interesting for me about those materials. So I think, like, only in my 4th year, I started to be really cooked in a way. But that's the nice thing about design academy, that it's maybe not the classical design, industrial design studies, but they kind of, if you have the right attitude and you have, like, the right mind for it, you can find yourself in it.
Well, you certainly have.
Yeah,
So
luckily, yeah.
And one of the few geniuses to come out of the establishment, I think. I mean, it's a really nice day. I think we've had a really interesting conversation. Do we think that's a good place to end it? Or do you have
let's get
anything
it
to
over with now.
Let's go have a beer outside.
It's beer time, wine time.
Thank you, Caroline.
I'd really want to thank you all so much for coming to Basel from far-flung places to actually take part in this. And people hate asking questions from the floor, in my experience. And if people do, I always think it's just easy. I mean, if somebody would like to ask a question from the floor, you're really, really welcome. But I think that people usually like to just nobble people afterwards and sort of have a private chat. So do feel free to stop these people on their way to the bar and deprive them from that pleasure for just a few more minutes, if you'd like to. All right, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much.